At 19, Eliza Hart stood before a choice no woman should face. Become the property of a man who collected wives like cattle, or run into a desert that killed stronger souls than hers. The ink wasn't even dry on the papers her stepfather signed, selling her for $300 and a handshake when she made her decision. She would die free rather than live owned. But freedom, she'd soon learn, came with a price written in blood, sand, and the mercy of a scarred stranger who'd forgotten how to trust. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eliza's story travels. The heat hit Eliza's face like an open furnace the moment she stepped outside the barn. Arizona territory didn't forgive weakness, and the August sun was already climbing toward its noon fury. Sweat traced lines through the dust on her neck as she moved quickly, quietly, toward the corral where her stepfather kept his horses. Her hands shook, not from fear. She'd burned through fear 2 hours ago when she'd heard Marcus Dalton's voice in the front parlor, heard him laugh that low, possessive laugh that made her skin crawl. No, her hands shook from rage and adrenaline and the wild, reckless hope that she might actually make it out alive. $300, her stepfather had said, his voice carrying through the thin walls of the ranch house. And you'll take the girl tonight. No waiting, no ceremony. She's 19, healthy, and she'll do what she's told, or you can teach her how. Eliza had pressed herself against the hallway wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Through the crack in the door, she'd seen Marcus Dalton, 52 years old, thick around the middle, with dead eyes and hands that had buried 3 wives already. Everyone knew what happened to Marcus Dalton's wives. They disappeared into his ranch 30 miles south, and when they came out, it was in pine boxes, or not at all. She a virgin? Dalton had asked, as casually as if he were inquiring about a horse's teeth. Her stepfather had hesitated. Far as I know. Good. I'll pay $400 if you guarantee it. The sound of coins hitting the table had been the sound of Eliza's life being weighed and sold. She'd backed away from the door, mind racing, then turned and run, not out the front where they'd see her, but toward the back, toward the kitchen, toward the small bag she'd been secretly packing for 3 weeks. She'd known this was coming. Ever since her mother died 6 months ago, her stepfather had looked at her differently. Not like a daughter, but like livestock, an asset to be liquidated. And Marcus Dalton had been sniffing around for months, his offers getting more aggressive, his visits more frequent. Now, in the harsh morning light, Eliza reached the corral fence and climbed over. 6 horses stood in the shade of the lean-to, but only one lifted its head as she approached. Sadie, a 15-year-old bay mare with a bad leg and cloudy eyes. Her stepfather had said she'd be shot before winter. Nobody else even looked at her anymore. Perfect. Hey, girl, Eliza whispered, approaching slowly. The mare's ears flicked forward, then back. It's just me. Just Eliza. We're going to help each other today, okay? She'd stolen a bridle the week before, hidden it in the feed room, no saddle. A saddle would be noticed, and besides, she'd ridden bareback plenty of times. She slipped the bridle over Sadie's head, her fingers working quickly despite their trembling. The mare accepted it with tired patience. Miss Eliza? The voice froze her blood. She turned to see Tommy, the ranch hand's 12-year-old son, standing at the corral gate with wide eyes. Tommy, she kept her voice steady, gentle. You didn't see me here. The boy looked at the horse, at the bridle, at the small canvas bag slung across Eliza's back. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. Understanding dawned across his freckled face. Is it true? He asked quietly. Is Mr. Dalton really? Yes. The word came out harder than she intended. And I'm leaving, right now. You didn't see me, Tommy. You understand? If anyone asks, you say you were in the feed room all morning. Tommy bit his lip. His own father had been beaten half to death by men like Marcus Dalton over a disputed water claim. He knew what monsters looked like. After a long moment, he nodded. Gate's stuck on the east side, he said carefully. Been stuck all week. Real hard to close. If a smart horse wanted to get out, she probably could push right through it. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Miss Eliza? Tommy's voice stopped her as she led Sadie toward the gate. My mama says the desert kills folks who don't respect it. Says you need water and you need to stay out of the sun. Says, I know. She managed a smile she didn't feel. I'll be careful. Where are you going to go? North, far as this horse will take me. That ain't very far, Tommy said, looking at Sadie's bad leg. She's half lame and mostly blind. Then I guess we're a good match. Eliza swung herself onto the mare's back, feeling the animal's bones prominent beneath her. Because I'm half crazy and mostly desperate. She pressed her heels to Sadie's sides, and the old mare moved forward slowly, with a pronounced limp. But she moved. Tommy ran ahead and opened the gate, then wedged it open with a rock like he'd found it that way. Eliza rode through without looking back. The moment she cleared the ranch property, she urged Sadie into a trot. The mare protested, her gait uneven and painful to watch, but she tried. God, she tried. Eliza leaned low over her neck, whispering encouragement, and pointed her toward the rocky hills that rose like broken teeth against the northern horizon. She'd studied maps. She'd listened to the ranch hands talk. 30 miles north was the town of Prescott, big enough to disappear in, far enough that Marcus Dalton's reach might not extend there. Between here and there was desert, arroyos, rattlesnakes, and probably death. But behind her was definitely death, a slower, more horrible death. So Eliza rode. The sun climbed higher. The land turned from brown to white, from scrub grass to bare rock and sand. Sadie's breathing grew labored. Eliza walked her more than she rode, trying to conserve the horse's strength, but she could feel the animal failing beneath her. The mare's head drooped lower with each step. Come on, girl, Eliza murmured, stroking the sweaty neck. Just a little further, please. But she knew. She'd known from the moment she chose this horse. Sadie wasn't going to make it 30 miles. Hell, she probably wasn't going to make 10. They'd been traveling for 3 hours when Eliza heard it. The distant sound of men's voices carried on the desert wind. She turned in her seat, shading her eyes against the glare, and saw them, 3 riders, maybe 2 miles back, moving fast. Her heart dropped into her stomach. They'd found her already. Of course they had. Her stepfather would have checked on his merchandise the moment Dalton left, would have seen her missing, would have sent his men after her. And Marcus Dalton's men. Those would be coming too. Sadie, she said urgently, pressing her heels into the mare's sides. I'm sorry, girl, but we have to run. The horse tried. She broke into a lurching, painful canter that covered maybe 20 yards before her bad leg buckled. Eliza felt the mare stumble, felt her try to catch herself, and then they were both going down. She kicked free of the horse's body and rolled, rocks tearing at her dress and skin. When she came to a stop, her shoulder screaming with pain, she looked back to see Sadie on her side, breathing hard, unable to rise. No, Eliza whispered. She scrambled back to the horse, hands hovering over the animal's heaving flanks. No, please get up, please. But Sadie's eyes, those cloudy, tired eyes, just looked at her with something like relief. The mare had been in pain for years. Maybe this was mercy. Eliza choked on a sob. She pressed her forehead to the horse's neck, felt the rapid, fluttering heartbeat beneath the skin. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I asked this of you. The voices behind her were getting closer. She could hear individual words now, shouted commands, the thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth. With shaking hands, Eliza pulled her small canvas bag free, slinging it across her back. Inside was a canteen, half full, maybe 3 days' water if she was careful. A knife, $27 she'd saved from selling her mother's jewelry, and a battered map. That was it. That was everything she owned in the world. She looked at the horizon. Flat, brutal, endless. The riders were less than a mile away now. Eliza stood, kissed her palm, and pressed it to Sadie's forehead. Thank you for trying. Then she ran. The desert floor was treacherous, loose rock, hidden holes, clusters of barrel cactus waiting to tear skin. Eliza ran anyway, her boots slipping and sliding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sun beat down like a physical weight, pressing her into the earth. Sweat poured down her face, stinging her eyes. She made it maybe half a mile before her legs gave out. She fell to her knees behind a cluster of rocks, pressing herself into what little shade they offered. Her lungs burned, her head swam. When she raised the canteen to her lips, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. Don't drink too much, Make it last." She allowed herself 3 small swallows, then forced the canteen away from her mouth. The water was already warm, tasting of metal and dust. The sound of horses grew louder, then stopped. "Found the horse," a man's voice shouted. "She's on foot." "Can't have gone far," another voice answered. "Spread out. Find her." Eliza pressed herself flatter against the rocks, trying to quiet her breathing. Through gaps in the stone, she could see them. 4 men now, not 3. They'd split up, moving in a wide arc, searching. One of them was Jake Morrison, her stepfather's foreman. The others she didn't recognize, but from their hard faces and the rifles across their saddles, she knew exactly what kind of men they were. The kind Marcus Dalton hired to keep his wives from running. Jake dismounted, studying the ground. He was a tracker, a good one. He'd find her trail in minutes. Eliza pulled the knife from her bag. It was small, meant for cutting rope or cleaning game, but the blade was sharp. She held it in front of her with both hands, trying to stop them from shaking. If they caught her, she wouldn't go easy. She'd make them regret it. "Christ, it's hot," one of the men said, stopping his horse less than 30 feet from where Eliza hid. "Girl's probably dead already. Dalton's going to be pissed he paid $400 for a corpse." "She ain't dead yet," Jake said, still studying the ground. He looked up, his eyes scanning the rocks. "But she will be soon. No water, no shelter, and she took the lame horse. Stupid girl." "Desperate girl," the first man corrected. "Can't say I blame her. Dalton's last wife lasted, 6 months?" "5, Jake spat on the ground. "But that ain't our concern. We find her, we bring her back, we collect our pay. What happens after that is between her and her new husband." "Some husband," the man muttered, but he didn't argue further. They moved on, their horses' hooves crunching over the rocky ground. Eliza waited, counting her heartbeats, until the sound faded into the distance. Then she waited longer, until her muscles screamed from holding the same position, until the sun shifted and her small patch of shade began to disappear. Finally, when she couldn't hear them anymore, she moved. Not back the way she'd come. They'd be watching for that. Not north toward Prescott. They'd expect that too. Instead, she turned northwest toward the broken badlands where the rock formations grew twisted and strange, where a person could hide in 100 different crevices and shadows, where a person could also die alone and never be found. She walked. The sun climbed toward its zenith, and the temperature climbed with it, 100 degrees, 110, 120. The air itself seemed to shimmer and burn. Eliza's lips cracked and bled, her head pounded. She stumbled over rocks she should have seen, her vision swimming with heat and exhaustion. "Keep moving. Don't stop. If you stop, you die." But her body had other ideas. Her legs felt like water, like they belonged to someone else. The horizon tilted and swayed. She fell, caught herself, stood, fell again. This time, getting up took longer. Water. Need water. She fumbled for the canteen, brought it to her lips, and forced herself to stop after 2 swallows. The water barely touched her thirst. She had maybe 1 day's supply left, if that. The sun was directly overhead now, and there was no shade anywhere. The landscape had turned alien, red rock and white sand, and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Heat waves rose from the ground in rippling curtains. In the distance, something moved, but when Eliza tried to focus on it, it disappeared. Hallucination. You're seeing things. She walked, fell, walked. The knife slipped from her fingers, and she almost didn't stop to pick it up. The canvas bag seemed to weigh 100 pounds. Her dress, once blue, was now gray with dust and dark with sweat. Time became meaningless. There was only heat, thirst, and the endless rhythm of step, 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 fall, rise, step, step, step. She didn't hear the riders return until they were almost on top of her. "There!" Eliza's head snapped up. 3 of them, 50 yards away and closing fast. Jake Morrison in the lead, his face grim and determined. She ran, or tried to. Her legs gave out after 10 steps, and she went down hard, tasting blood and dirt. She rolled onto her back, raising the knife with both hands, and heard herself making sounds, animal sounds, desperate sounds. "Easy now," Jake said, dismounting. His shadow fell across her like a blessing and a curse. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I won't go back." Eliza's voice was a raw croak. "I'll die first." "You're going to die out here anyway, girl. At least Dalton's place has water. And a grave. His last 3 wives all have graves." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "That ain't my business." "Then make it your business." Eliza tried to sit up, but her head spun. "Help me. Please. You know what he is. You know what he'll do to me." "I know I got a job to do." But Jake wouldn't meet her eyes. "And I know your stepfather's got my wages held until I bring you back. I have money, $27. It's yours. All of it. Just tell them you couldn't find me. Tell them I died out here." For a moment, just a moment, she saw something like sympathy flicker across Jake's weathered face. Then it hardened again. $27 ain't going to keep my family fed through winter," he said. He reached for her arm. "Come on now, don't fight." Eliza drove the knife toward his hand. She was weak, dehydrated, half delirious, but desperation gave her speed. The blade caught Jake across the knuckles, drawing blood. He jerked back with a curse, and in that moment of surprise, Eliza rolled to her feet and ran. She made it 15 feet before one of the other men tackled her from horseback. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and dust. Eliza's knife went flying. She screamed, clawed, bit, caught the man's thumb between her teeth, and bit down until she tasted blood. He howled and backhanded her across the face. Stars exploded behind her eyes. "Little bitch broke skin." The man clutched his bleeding hand. "Jake, you said she'd come quiet." "I said no such thing." Jake dismounted, wrapping a bandana around his bleeding knuckles. He looked down at Eliza, who was trying to crawl away on her hands and knees. "She's got spirit. I'll give her that. Dalton might like that. Or it might get her killed faster." "Please." Eliza's voice broke. Blood ran from her nose where she'd been hit, mixing with the dust on her face. "Please don't do this. I'm begging you." Jake picked up her knife, studied it, then tossed it into the brush. He grabbed Eliza by the arm and hauled her to her feet. She fought. God, she fought. But her body had nothing left. She was a rag doll in his grip. "Tie her," Jake told his men, "and get some water in her. Dalton wants her alive." They bound her wrists with rough rope that bit into her skin. One of them pressed a canteen to her lips, and she drank greedily, desperately, water spilling down her chin. When they pulled it away, she actually whimpered. "That's enough," Jake said. "We got a long ride back." They threw her onto a horse, not gently, and tied her bound wrist to the saddle horn. Jake mounted behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her from falling. The other men took positions on either side. As they turned their horses south back toward her stepfather's ranch and Marcus Dalton's waiting hands, Eliza felt something inside her break. Not her spirit. That was still there, still burning like a coal in her chest. But something else. Some last illusion of fairness or justice or mercy in the world. She'd tried. She'd stolen a dying horse and ridden into the desert and fought with every ounce of strength she had. And it hadn't been enough. It would never be enough. The world didn't care about her courage or her will to live. The world just kept turning, crushing people like her under its weight. "I'm going to kill him," she whispered, so quiet that Jake probably didn't hear. "If I get the chance, I'm going to kill Marcus Dalton." Jake's arm tightened around her waist, but he didn't respond. They rode south as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. 4 riders and a girl who had learned that in this world, freedom wasn't given. It was only ever borrowed, and always at a price higher than anyone should have to pay. The ride back took 3 hours. 3 hours of heat and dust and the rope cutting into Eliza's wrists. 3 hours of Jake Morrison's silent presence behind her, his arm around her waist, keeping her upright when exhaustion made her sway. 3 hours of thinking about Marcus Dalton's dead eyes and dead wives, and the small ranch 30 miles south where she would disappear just like they had. The sun was touching the horizon when they finally reached her stepfather's property. The ranch house looked exactly as it had that morning. Weathered wood, sagging porch, chickens scratching in the dirt. But to Eliza, it looked like the gates of hell. Marcus Dalton was waiting on the porch. He stood as they rode up, a thick-bodied man in expensive clothes that didn't quite fit his frame. His hair was gray at the temples, his face tanned and lined from years in the sun. And his eyes, those flat, emotionless eyes, tracked Eliza like a snake watching a mouse. "Found her in the Badlands," Jake said, dismounting. He reached up to untie Eliza's wrists from the saddle horn. She put up a fight. I can see that. Dalton's gaze moved over Eliza's torn dress, her bloody nose, the bruise forming on her cheek. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Good. I like them with spirit. They break more satisfyingly. Eliza's stepfather appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on his pants. Thank Christ. I thought maybe the desert took her. Desert tried, Jake said. He pulled Eliza down from the horse, steadying her when her legs almost gave out. But she's tougher than she looks. She always was stubborn. Her stepfather descended the porch steps, counting out bills. Here's your pay, Morrison, plus extra for the trouble. Jake took the money without comment, but as he turned to leave, his eyes met Eliza's for just a moment. She saw the apology there, the shame, the resignation of a man who'd sold his conscience for his family's survival. She didn't forgive him. Well then, Marcus Dalton said, walking down the steps. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who'd never had to hurry for anything in his life. Let's have a look at my purchase. He reached for Eliza's chin, tilting her face up to the dying light. His fingers were soft, uncalloused, but they gripped with iron strength. Eliza held very still, her heart hammering, every instinct screaming at her to pull away. But she'd seen what happened to women who showed fear to men like Dalton. It excited them, made them cruel. So she met his eyes instead, stared right back at him with all the hatred burning in her chest. Dalton smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd broken women before and would break her too. Still got that fire, he murmured. Good. My last wife lost hers too quickly. Barely made it 6 months before she... He waved a hand vaguely. Well, no point dwelling on the past. She didn't lose it, Eliza said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. You beat it out of her. Her stepfather's hand cracked across her face before Dalton could respond. Eliza's head snapped to the side, her ear ringing. You watch your mouth, girl, her stepfather snarled. Mr. Dalton's your husband now. You show respect. Husband? Eliza laughed, and it sounded half mad even to her own ears. You need a ceremony for a husband. This is just ownership. You sold me like a cow. Dalton chuckled, actually chuckled. Smart, too. My, I really did get my money's worth. He released her chin and turned to her stepfather. The papers are in order? Fully legal? Signed and witnessed. She's yours, free and clear. Property transfer, not a marriage contract. Cleaner that way. No questions about inheritance or rights. Eliza felt the words like a physical blow. Property transfer. They'd literally sold her like livestock. Perfect. Dalton gestured to his men, who'd been waiting by their horses. Get her loaded up. We ride tonight. Tonight? Her stepfather frowned. It's near dark. The desert is exactly why we ride at night. Cooler. And besides, Dalton's smile widened as he looked at Eliza. I'm eager to get my new property home. 2 of Dalton's men stepped forward. Unlike Jake Morrison, these men had no sympathy in their eyes. They were hired muscle, the kind who hurt people for pay and slept soundly afterward. One of them grabbed Eliza's arm, the same arm already bruised from the day's violence, and she couldn't stop the gasp of pain that escaped. Wait, she heard herself say. The word came out desperate, panicked. Please wait. I need to get my things. My mother's Bible, her locket. You don't need nothing, the man holding her said flatly. Mr. Dalton provides everything his women need. Please. She looked at her stepfather, hating herself for begging, but unable to stop. Just 5 minutes. Just let me say goodbye to the house, to Mama's things. Her stepfather's face hardened. Your mama's dead, and whatever she left ain't yours no more. You're Dalton's property now. You don't own nothing. But load her up, Dalton said, bored with the conversation. And gag her if she keeps talking. I don't want to listen to crying all the way home. They dragged her toward the horses. Eliza's mind raced, searching desperately for options, for anything that might give her another chance. But there was nothing. 4 armed men, her hands still bound, the desert darkening around them. There was no escape this time. They lifted her onto a horse, not her own this time, but a tall gelding that danced nervously under the weight of a rider who couldn't control it. One of Dalton's men mounted behind her, his arms caging her in. She could smell whiskey on his breath, sweat and leather and violence. "Try anything," he whispered in her ear, "and I'll make you regret it long before we reach the ranch." Marcus Dalton swung onto his own horse, a massive black stallion that probably cost more than Eliza's entire life. He looked at her stepfather and tipped his hat. "Pleasure doing business with you." "Likewise. And if she gives you trouble—" "Oh, I know how to handle troublesome women." Dalton's smile was all teeth. "It's my specialty." They rode out as the last light bled from the sky, 6 riders moving south into the gathering darkness. Eliza twisted in the saddle, watching her stepfather's ranch disappear behind them, and felt the last thread of hope snap inside her chest. She'd tried to run. She'd failed. Now she was heading to a place where women went and never came back, bought and paid for by a man who smiled when he talked about breaking spirits. Behind her lay a stepfather who'd sold her without a second thought. Around her rode men who saw her as cargo, not a person. And ahead, somewhere in the darkness ahead, was Marcus Dalton's ranch, where 3 wives were buried in unmarked graves, where a 4th would join them soon enough. The stars came out one by one, cold and distant and uncaring. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust and the promise of another scorching day tomorrow. The horses moved at a steady walk, their hoofbeats rhythmic and hypnotic. Eliza closed her eyes and thought about her mother, about the stories she used to tell, about brave women in old ballads who fought against impossible odds. Her mother had always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to fight even when fear told you to give up. "I'm not giving up," Eliza thought fiercely. "I'm not. They can tie my hands and drag me across the desert and call me property, but I'm not giving up. I'll find another chance. I'll wait and watch, and when they make a mistake, when they drop their guard for just 1 second, I'll run again. And next time, I'll make sure I have a better horse." The thought was so absurd, so darkly funny given her circumstances, that she actually felt her lips twitch in something like a smile. The man behind her felt it, and his arms tightened warningly. "Something amusing?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "No," Eliza said, "nothing at all." But inside, in the secret place where her spirit still burned, she was laughing. Because they might have caught her, might have bound her, might think they owned her, but they didn't understand what they'd bought. They didn't know that every woman in her family had been stubborn to the point of madness, that her grandmother had once shot a man who tried to take her land, that her mother had survived 5 years alone in the wilderness after her first husband died. Eliza Hart came from women who didn't break. They bent, they survived, they waited for their moment, and then they fought back twice as hard. So she rode south through the darkness, hands bound and body bruised, toward a ranch that was supposed to be her grave. And she plotted, she planned, she memorized every turn, every landmark, every detail that might help her when she ran again, because she would run again. The desert had failed to kill her. Marcus Dalton would too. She just had to survive long enough to prove it. The night deepened around them, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, and Eliza Hart made herself a promise. She would live through this. She would escape. And anyone who stood in her way, anyone who tried to keep her in chains, would learn that some women weren't meant to be owned. Some women were meant to burn the whole world down trying to be free. They rode for 4 hours into the darkness before Marcus Dalton finally called a halt. The desert night had turned cold, the temperature dropping 40 degrees from the day's brutal heat, and Eliza was shivering in her torn dress despite the warmth of the horse beneath her, and the man pressed against her back. "We'll camp here," Dalton announced, dismounting in a clearing surrounded by tall saguaro cacti that stood like silent sentinels in the starlight. "Phillips, get a fire going. Monroe, check the horses. And someone get that girl down before she falls off and breaks something I paid good money for." The man behind Eliza, Phillips apparently, dismounted and pulled her roughly from the saddle. Her legs buckled the moment her feet hit the ground, numb from hours of riding. She would have fallen if Phillips hadn't caught her arm, his grip bruising. "Careful with the merchandise," Dalton said mildly, but there was amusement in his voice. He was enjoying this, enjoying her helplessness, her fear, the absolute control he had over every aspect of her existence. They tied her to a Joshua tree at the edge of the camp, ropes circling her waist and binding her to the trunk. Her hands remained bound in front of her. When she tried to work her fingers, testing the knots, Phillips backhanded her casually. "Don't," he said simply. Eliza tasted blood again. She was starting to wonder if she'd ever taste anything else. The men made camp with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. A fire sprang up quickly, fed with dried mesquite and creosote wood. They laid out bedrolls, checked weapons, passed around jerky and hardtack. No one offered Eliza anything. She watched the meat and tried not to think about how long it had been since she'd had food. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago and moved into a tight, painful knot. Marcus Dalton settled himself near the fire, his bulk making the ground seem to sag beneath him. He pulled out a cigar, lit it with a burning twig, and studied Eliza through the smoke. "You know what I like about the desert?" he asked conversationally, as if they were old friends sharing a pleasant evening. "It's honest. Out here, there's no pretense. The strong survive, the weak die, and everything in between is just noise." Eliza said nothing. She'd learned in the last 12 hours that sometimes silence was the only weapon she had left. "Your stepfather tells me you can read and write," Dalton continued, "that your mama was a schoolteacher before she married him. That true?" Still, Eliza remained silent. "Answer Mr. Dalton when he talks to you," Phillips growled, taking a step toward her. "It's fine," Dalton said, waving him back. "She's scared. First night away from home, tied to a tree, surrounded by strange men. I'd be quiet too." He drew on his cigar, the tip glowing red in the darkness. "But here's something you need to understand, girl. Silence only works if the person you're being silent to cares about your opinion. I don't. I own you, legal and binding. So whether you talk or stay quiet, answer or ignore me, it makes no difference to how this ends." "Then why bother talking to me at all?" The words escaped before Eliza could stop them. Her voice was hoarse, raw from thirst and screaming, but it still held an edge of defiance. Dalton smiled. "There she is. I was starting to worry the desert had broken you already." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I talked to you because I'm curious. See, my last 3 wives, they were quiet girls, obedient, scared from the start. And you know what? They were boring, died boring too, whimpering and praying and acting like I was the worst thing that ever happened to them." "You were," Eliza said flatly. "Maybe. But my point is, you're different. You stole a half-dead horse and rode into the desert rather than marry me. You cut Jake Morrison, and Jake's a hard man to cut. You looked me in the eye when most women won't even look at my boots. That's interesting. That's worth $400. I'm not interested in being interesting to you." "Good thing it doesn't matter what you're interested in." Dalton stood, stretched, and walked toward her. Eliza pressed herself back against the tree trunk, but there was nowhere to go. He stopped a foot away, close enough that she could smell the cigar smoke on his breath. "Here's how this works. We reach my ranch tomorrow evening. You'll be given a room, locked from the outside naturally. You'll be fed, clothed, kept comfortable, and in return, you'll do exactly what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, without question or complaint. And if I refuse, then you'll be taught not to refuse." His hand came up, not striking her, but touching her cheek where the bruise was already forming. His fingers were gentle, almost tender, which somehow made it worse. "I've broken dozens of horses in my time. Wild ones, mean ones, stubborn ones. They all break eventually. Some take longer than others, but they all break. You understand what I'm telling you?" Eliza met his eyes. "I understand you've killed 3 women, and you're planning to kill me too." Something flickered across Dalton's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "They weren't murdered, if that's what you're implying. One died in childbirth, one caught pneumonia, one—" He paused, considering. "One had an accident with the stairs. How convenient, isn't it?" He dropped his hand and stepped back. "Get some sleep, girl. Tomorrow's another long ride, and I want you alive and mostly undamaged when we arrive." He returned to the fire, and the conversation among the men turned to other things: water rights, cattle prices, some dispute with a neighboring ranch. Eliza stopped listening. She was too busy working at the ropes around her wrists, trying to find any give in the knots. There was none. Whoever had tied her knew their business. The night grew colder. The fire burned low. One by one, the men rolled into their bedrolls until only one remained awake to keep watch. It was Monroe, a lean man with a scar across his throat and eyes that never seemed to blink. He sat with his back to a rock and his rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness beyond the fire's light. Eliza's head nodded forward. She jerked it back up, determined to stay awake, to watch for any opportunity. But exhaustion was a weight pressing down on her, and the day's violence had taken everything she had. Her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts. She dreamed of her mother, of the house they'd lived in before her mother married that bastard stepfather, when it was just the two of them and life was hard but honest. Her mother was teaching her to read, her finger tracing words in an old Bible, her voice patient and warm. "Remember, Eliza," her mother said in the dream, looking up with eyes that held all the love in the world. "The only person who can make you a prisoner is yourself. They can lock your body, but your mind, your spirit, that's always free if you choose it to be." "I'm trying, Mama," Eliza whispered. "I know, baby, I know." A sound woke her. Eliza's eyes snapped open to find the sky beginning to lighten in the east, that pre-dawn gray that came before sunrise. The fire had burned to embers. The men were still asleep, including Monroe, who'd apparently decided his watch could end early. And there, standing at the edge of the camp, was a figure. Eliza blinked, certain she was still dreaming. The figure was tall, lean, dressed in dark clothes that blended with the shadows. A man, she thought, though in the dim light it was hard to be sure. He stood perfectly still, watching the sleeping camp, one hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Their eyes met across the distance. Even in the darkness, Eliza could feel the weight of his gaze. She opened her mouth, to scream, to warn the men, to do something, but the stranger raised one finger to his lips, the universal gesture for silence. Then he melted back into the desert like smoke, and Eliza was left wondering if she'd seen anything at all. The camp stirred as the sun broke the horizon. Phillips kicked Monroe awake, cursing him for sleeping on watch. Monroe swore he'd only closed his eyes for a minute. Dalton emerged from his bedroll with a grunt and immediately called for coffee. The smell of it, when Phillips got it brewing, made Eliza's stomach twist with hunger and longing. They broke camp quickly. Dalton walked over to where Eliza was tied, studying her with the same expression a man might use when inspecting livestock. "You look terrible," he said cheerfully. "Good thing I like a project." He cut the rope binding her to the tree, but left her wrists tied. "We'll ride hard today. I want to be home before dark. Try to keep up, and don't slow us down." They rode southeast as the sun climbed, the temperature rising degree by brutal degree. Eliza's head throbbed. Her lips cracked and bled. When they finally stopped at midday to water the horses, Phillips gave her half a canteen of warm, metallic water and a piece of jerky so hard it nearly broke her teeth. She ate it anyway, forcing down every bite. That was when she saw him again. The stranger. He was on a ridge maybe a quarter-mile north, sitting on a gray horse and watching their group with the stillness of a predator. This time, Dalton's men saw him too. "We got company," Monroe said, his hand moving to his rifle. Dalton shaded his eyes, squinting at the distant figure. "Who is that?" "Can't tell from here. Want me to ride up and ask his business?" "No." Dalton's voice was sharp. "We don't have time for distractions. He's probably just a drifter. Ignore him." But as they mounted up and continued south, Eliza noticed Dalton kept glancing back over his shoulder, and the stranger kept pace with them, always staying just out of rifle range, always watching. By mid-afternoon, the stranger had moved closer, close enough that Eliza could make out details. The wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, the rifle across his saddle, the way he sat his horse like he'd been born on it. There was something in his posture, something in the patient way he followed, that made her think of wolves tracking prey. "That's it," Phillips snarled. "I'm going to go run that son of a bitch off." "You'll do no such thing," Dalton snapped. "We're 3 hours from my property. Once we cross onto my land, he won't dare follow." "And if he does?" "Then we'll deal with him there, where I've got 20 men and all the time in the world." Dalton kicked his horse into a faster pace. "Come on, I want to be home." They rode hard, pushing the horses, and the stranger kept pace. Eliza found herself twisting in the saddle, trying to get a better look at him. Who was he? What did he want? Was he following them specifically, or was he just traveling in the same direction? And why? Why did part of her hope he was following them? The sun was touching the western horizon when they finally reached Dalton's land. Eliza knew they'd crossed onto his property because everything changed. Fences appeared, well-maintained and strong. Cattle grazed in protected valleys. A water tower rose in the distance. This wasn't some struggling ranch scraping by. This was money, power, resources. Dalton's ranch house appeared as they crested a final hill. It was bigger than Eliza had imagined, a sprawling structure of wood and stone with a wide porch and actual glass windows. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, a barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, corrals. Men moved around doing end-of-day chores, at least a dozen that Eliza could see. "Home sweet home," Dalton said, satisfaction thick in his voice. "What do you think, girl? Better than that hovel your stepfather kept, isn't it?" Eliza didn't answer. She was looking back the way they'd come, searching the horizon for the stranger. He was there, stopped on the ridge that marked the property line, still watching. "Who are you?" she thought desperately. "Why are you following us?" As if he'd heard her thoughts, the stranger turned his horse and rode away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Eliza felt something inside her break a little more. For a few hours, she'd had this strange, irrational hope that maybe the stranger was coming to help her. That maybe he was some wandering hero from the stories her mother used to tell. But no, he was just a drifter who'd happened to be traveling the same direction. Now he was gone, and she was here, and there was no one coming to save her. She'd have to save herself. They rode into the ranch yard as the last light bled from the sky. Men stopped their work to stare as Dalton dismounted. Eliza saw curiosity in some faces, pity in others, and a kind of knowing resignation in most. They'd seen this before. However many wives Dalton had really had, 3 or more, these men had watched them arrive and watched them disappear. "Peters!" Dalton called out. An older man with gray hair and a weathered face approached. "Get the upstairs room ready. Fresh linens, lock on the outside of the door, and bar the windows. Our new guest will be staying for a while." "Yes, sir, Mr. Dalton." "And send someone to fetch Doc Miller. I want her checked over. Make sure she's healthy enough for—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Every man there knew what he meant. Phillips pulled Eliza down from the horse. Her legs gave out completely this time, and she collapsed in the dust. Rough hands hauled her upright. Someone laughed, not kindly. "Get her inside," Dalton ordered. "Clean her up. Feed her. I want her presentable by tomorrow night." They dragged her toward the house. Eliza tried to walk, tried to maintain some shred of dignity, but her body wasn't cooperating. She stumbled up the porch steps and through a doorway into a large room lit by oil lamps. She had an impression of expensive furniture, animal heads mounted on walls, a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. Then she was being hauled up a staircase, down a hallway, and into a room at the end. Peters was there, already laying out blankets on a bed. The windows were indeed barred, iron rods bolted into the frames. The door was heavy wood with a new lock that gleamed in the lamplight. "Bath's being drawn," Peters said without looking at her. "Food'll be up in 20 minutes. Don't try anything stupid. The drop from that window would kill you, and Mr. Dalton's men patrol all night." They cut the ropes on her wrists and shoved her further into the room. The door slammed shut behind her. She heard the lock turn, heavy and final. Eliza stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly, and tried to process what had just happened. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd been at her stepfather's ranch. Now she was here, locked in a room in Marcus Dalton's house. And tomorrow night he'd said she needed to be presentable. She knew what that meant. A knock on the door made her jump. It opened a crack and a young Mexican woman slipped inside carrying a copper tub. She was followed by 2 more women carrying buckets of steaming water. They filled the tub without speaking, not meeting Eliza's eyes. "Please," Eliza said to them. "Please, you have to help me. You have to—" "No hablo inglés," the first woman said, though her eyes said otherwise. She set down soap and a towel next to the tub. "Bañese, coma, duerma." Bathe, eat, sleep. Universal commands that needed no translation. The women left. The door locked again. Eliza stared at the tub of hot water and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since the morning. She'd been determined not to cry, had held it together through capture and violence and fear, but somehow the simple kindness of hot water broke something in her. She stripped off her ruined dress and lowered herself into the tub. The water was almost too hot, scalding her sunburned skin, but it felt like heaven. She scrubbed at the dirt and blood, watching the water turn brown around her. Her body was a map of bruises, purple on her arms where men had grabbed her, blue-black on her cheek where she'd been struck, yellow-green on her ribs where she'd fallen from Sadie. Sadie, the old mare who'd tried so hard and failed. Eliza wondered if she was still alive, lying in the desert, or if Jake Morrison had put her down mercifully. She hoped for the latter. Nothing deserved to die slowly under that sun. The food arrived as promised: bread, cheese, cold chicken, and water. Actual food, not the hardtack and jerky from the trail. Eliza ate mechanically, forcing down every bite. She needed strength. Whatever was coming tomorrow, she'd need every ounce of strength she could gather. As night fell completely, Eliza went to the barred window and looked out over Dalton's land. In the distance, she could see the glow of fires from the bunkhouse, could hear the faint sound of men's voices and someone playing a harmonica. The sky was full of stars, so many they seemed to blend together into rivers of light. Somewhere out there was the stranger who'd followed them. Somewhere out there was the desert that had almost killed her. Somewhere out there was freedom, if she could just find a way to reach it. But between her and freedom stood locked doors, armed men, and Marcus Dalton's absolute belief that he owned her. Eliza pressed her forehead against the cool iron bars and whispered to the night, "I'm not going to die here. I'm not going to be wife number 4 in an unmarked grave. I'll find a way out. I swear it." The stars didn't answer. They never did. She fell asleep on the bed, still damp from her bath, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. And she dreamed again. Not of her mother this time, but of the stranger on the ridge. In her dream, he turned his horse and rode away. But then he stopped, looked back, and instead of continuing on, he turned around and rode toward her, his face still hidden by his hat, but his intention clear. He was coming back. When Eliza woke in the gray light of dawn, she knew it had just been a dream born of desperation. The stranger was long gone, and she was on her own. But then, 3 hours after sunrise, as she sat by the barred window watching the ranch wake up, she saw movement on the northern ridge. A lone rider on a gray horse, sitting motionless, watching the ranch house. He'd come back. Eliza's heart began to pound. She pressed closer to the window, trying to see better, but the distance was too great. She couldn't make out his face, couldn't tell if he was even the same man. But something in her gut, some instinct she'd learned to trust during yesterday's nightmare in the desert, told her it was him. He sat there for maybe 10 minutes. Long enough that some of Dalton's men noticed him too. She heard shouting from below, saw men pointing. One of them started toward the barn, probably to get a rifle or a horse. The stranger turned and disappeared over the ridge. "Who is he?" Eliza whispered to the empty room. "What does he want?" She didn't know, but for the first time since Jake Morrison had caught her in the desert, Eliza felt something other than fear or despair. She felt curiosity, hope even, though she tried to squash it down, because hope was dangerous. Hope got you killed. But she couldn't quite kill it. Not when there was a stranger on a ridge who kept coming back, kept watching, kept hovering at the edges like he was waiting for something, or planning something. The day crawled past. Peters brought her lunch, more bread, some kind of stew. The doctor came, an older man with kind eyes who examined her roughly but not cruelly, checking her injuries, making sure nothing was broken. He said nothing beyond professional observations, wouldn't meet her eyes, and left as quickly as he'd come. As the sun began to set, the young Mexican woman returned with a dress. Not Eliza's torn one, but a new dress in deep green with actual buttons and a proper corset. There were shoes too, and a brush for her hair. "Para esta noche," the woman said softly. "For tonight." Eliza's stomach turned to ice. Tonight. Dalton had said she needed to be presentable by tonight, which meant tonight he'd... No. She couldn't think about it. If she thought about it, she'd break. Instead, she put on the dress, let the woman brush her hair until it shone copper in the lamplight, stood still while the corset was laced and the shoes fitted, and all the while, Her mind raced, searching desperately for any possible escape route. The window was barred and 3 stories up. The door was locked from outside. There would be men everywhere. Even if she somehow got out of the room, she'd never make it off the property. Unless the stranger came back. It was a foolish thought, a desperate thought, but it was all she had. As full dark fell and the woman left her alone again, Eliza heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps. Men's voices. The lock turning. The door opened and Marcus Dalton stood there, dressed in a clean suit, his hair slicked back. He looked her up and down with approval. "Much better," he said. "You clean up nice. Almost pretty, if you ignore the bruises." He stepped into the room. Behind him, Eliza could see Phillips and Monroe in the hallway, standing guard. "Come on downstairs. I had the cook make something special. We should celebrate your arrival properly." "I'd rather stay here." That wasn't a request. His voice hardened. "You can come willingly, or I can have my men carry you. Your choice." Eliza looked past him at Phillips and Monroe, at their flat, indifferent eyes. She thought about the stranger on the ridge, about her mother's words in the dream. The only person who can make you a prisoner is yourself. She wasn't beaten yet, and if she went downstairs, maybe she'd see something, learn something, find some weakness she could exploit. "I'll come," she said. Dalton smiled and offered his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to dinner. Eliza took it because she had no choice, and together they descended the stairs into whatever hell awaited her next. But as they walked, she made herself another promise. This wasn't over. The stranger had come back once, twice. If he came back a third time, she'd find a way to signal him. And if he didn't come back, she'd find another way. Because she was Eliza Hart, and she'd rather die fighting than live as Marcus Dalton's property for even one more day. The dining room was larger than Eliza's entire childhood home had been. A long table dominated the center, set with china and silver that gleamed in the light from a chandelier, an actual chandelier with crystal drops that caught and scattered the lamplight. Eliza had never seen anything like it outside of pictures in her mother's old magazines. Marcus Dalton pulled out a chair for her with exaggerated courtesy, then seated himself at the head of the table. A young Mexican girl, different from the one who'd brought the dress, appeared with covered dishes. Roasted meat, potatoes swimming in butter, vegetables Eliza couldn't identify. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger despite the fear coating her throat. "Eat," Dalton said, cutting into his steak. "You look half-starved." Eliza picked up her fork with shaking hands. The food tasted like ashes in her mouth, but she forced it down. She needed strength. Whatever happened tonight, she'd need every advantage she could get. "You're probably wondering what happens next," Dalton said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "Let me lay it out for you clearly so there's no confusion. You belong to me now, legal, binding, documented. You'll live in this house, eat food I provide, wear clothes I buy. In return, you'll fulfill certain duties, wifely duties, though we both know this isn't a real marriage. Then what is it? Ownership." He said it simply, without shame or hesitation. "I collect things, you see. Fine horses, quality cattle, beautiful objects. And women who would otherwise be wasted on poor men or left to rot as spinsters. I give them comfort, security, a place in the world. Your last 3 wives are dead." "Everyone dies eventually." Dalton took a sip of wine. "At least they died in comfort. Better than dying in childbirth in some dirt floor shack or working themselves to death at 25 like most ranch women. I gave them years they wouldn't have had otherwise." The casual cruelty of it, the way he reframed murder as mercy, made Eliza's blood run cold. This was a man who'd convinced himself his actions were justified, even noble, which meant he had no conscience left to appeal to. "I won't do it," she heard herself say. "Whatever you're expecting, I won't." The backhand came so fast she didn't see it. One moment she was speaking, the next she was on the floor, her chair knocked over, her mouth filling with blood. Pain exploded across her face where his ring had caught her cheekbone. Dalton stood over her, his expression barely changed. "Let's establish something right now. You don't tell me no. You don't refuse me anything. The last woman who tried that ended up with a broken arm and 3 shattered teeth." She learned. Eventually. He reached down and hauled Eliza to her feet by her hair, ignoring her cry of pain. "You seem like a smart girl," smarter than the others. So let me be very clear. Resistance will be met with pain. Obedience will be rewarded. Choose wisely." He released her, and Eliza stumbled back against the table, her scalp burning, tears streaming down her face from pure physical pain. She wanted to spit blood at him, wanted to grab the steak knife and drive it into his throat, wanted to scream until her voice gave out. Instead, she said nothing. Because what could she say? He held all the power here, and they both knew it. "Sit down," Dalton said, returning to his own chair. "Finish your dinner." Eliza righted her chair with trembling hands and sat. She couldn't taste the food anymore through the blood in her mouth, but she ate mechanically, her mind racing. The knife. There was a knife right there, within reach. If she was fast enough— "Don't even think about it," Dalton said, watching her eyes. "You'd be dead before you got 2 steps. Phillips is right outside that door, and he's faster than you'd believe. Besides, you don't have the killer instinct. I can tell. You're a fighter, but you're not a killer. Not yet, anyway." He was right, and Eliza hated him for it. She'd never hurt anyone in her life beyond that desperate slash at Jake Morrison's hand. The thought of actually driving a knife into human flesh made her stomach turn. Dalton finished his meal in silence, watching her with the patience of a cat with a cornered mouse. When the plates were cleared away by the silent Mexican girl, he stood and held out his hand. "Come with me." This was it. Whatever was going to happen, it was happening now. Eliza's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She looked at his outstretched hand and thought about refusing, about fighting, about dying right here rather than going with him. Then she thought about the stranger on the ridge, about the promise she'd made herself, about staying alive long enough to find one chance, just one chance. She stood, ignoring his hand, and followed him from the dining room. He led her through the house, past the main room with its mounted animal heads, up the stairs, down the hallway toward her locked room. But he didn't stop there. He continued to the end of the hall to a larger door with ornate carvings, his private chambers. Eliza's breath came in short, panicked gasps. Her vision narrowed. This was happening too fast. She wasn't ready. She needed more time to think, to plan. Dalton opened the door and gestured her inside. The room was massive, dominated by a 4-poster bed with red curtains. More expensive furniture, more signs of wealth. A window overlooking the ranch, unbarred because no one would dare try to escape from Marcus Dalton's private room. "Wait here," Dalton said. "I need to speak with my foreman about tomorrow's work. Don't try the window. It's a 40-foot drop onto rocks, and the door will be guarded. I'll return shortly." He left, closing the door behind him. Eliza heard the lock turn. She stood frozen for a long moment, her mind blank with terror. Then training, her mother's voice, her grandmother's stories, every lesson about survival she'd ever learned, kicked in. Move. Think. Find options. The window. She ran to it, looking down. Dalton was right. It was a fatal drop onto jagged rocks. But maybe if she tore the bedsheets into strips, tied them together. A sound outside made her freeze, not from the direction of the door, but from beyond the window. She peered into the darkness and saw movement in the shadows near the barn. A figure, barely visible in the starlight, leading a horse. The stranger. Eliza's heart leaped. He was here. He'd come onto the property. But why? What was he planning? As if he'd felt her watching, the figure looked up. Even across the distance, even in the darkness, Eliza felt their eyes meet. The stranger raised one hand, not waving, just acknowledging her presence. Then he moved deeper into the shadows and disappeared. He was waiting. But for what? Eliza's mind raced. If she could somehow get out of this room, if she could make it to the ground floor, if she could reach the barn, it was 1,000 ifs, each one more impossible than the last. But it was something. A thread of possibility where before there had been only despair. She turned from the window and surveyed the room more carefully. The door was locked and guarded. The window was too high. But there was a washstand with a heavy ceramic pitcher, a fireplace poker, a chair that could be broken into pieces. Improvised weapons, if she was brave enough to use them. Footsteps in the hallway. Dalton returning. Eliza grabbed the fireplace poker, weighing it in her hands. It was solid iron, heavy enough to do damage if she swung hard. She positioned herself behind the door, raising the poker above her head. The lock turned. The door opened. Marcus Dalton stepped through, and Eliza swung with everything she had. The poker caught him across the shoulder instead of his head. He turned at the last second, some instinct warning him, and her killing blow became merely painful. Dalton roared in pain and rage, stumbling forward. Eliza raised the poker for another swing, but he was faster than his bulk suggested. His hand shot out and caught her wrist, squeezing until bones ground together and she gasped, the poker clattering to the floor. "You little bitch," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "I was going to be gentle, make it easy for you, but now—" The explosion of gunfire cut him off. Not close. Somewhere outside, near the barn. Multiple shots in rapid succession, men shouting, horses screaming. Dalton's head snapped toward the window, his grip on Eliza's wrist loosening fractionally. She drove her knee into his groin with everything she had. Dalton folded with a sound that was half grunt, half wheeze. Eliza tore free of his grip and ran for the door. Phillips was there, torn between guarding the room and responding to the gunfire outside. That moment of hesitation cost him. Eliza slammed into him full force, catching him off balance, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs. "Boss!" Phillips shouted, trying to grab her. "Boss, she's—" Eliza's elbow caught him in the throat, more by luck than skill. He gagged, his grip weakening, and she scrambled free. Her feet pounded down the hallway toward the stairs, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Behind her, she heard Dalton bellowing for his men, heard Phillips choking and cursing. More gunfire. Closer now. The front door of the house exploded inward with a crash that shook the walls. Eliza reached the top of the stairs and stopped, frozen by what she saw below. The stranger stood in the shattered doorway, a rifle in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. He was tall, taller than she'd realized, with a lean, hard face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. His eyes, when they met hers, were gray as winter storms. "Move," he said. One word, low and urgent. Eliza moved. She flew down the stairs, nearly falling in her haste, the green dress tangling around her legs. The stranger stepped aside to let her pass, then turned back to the hallway, his rifle tracking for targets. "Back door," he said. "Through the kitchen, horses waiting." "Who are—" "Later. Run." She ran. Through the main room, into a kitchen she'd never seen before, past a terrified cook who pressed herself against the wall. The back door was already open. Beyond it, in the yard, chaos reigned. Dalton's men were running in all directions, some toward the gunfire near the barn, others toward the house. In the confusion of darkness and shouting, nobody seemed to notice one woman in a green dress slipping out into the night. A gray horse stood tied to a post near the kitchen door, saddled and ready. The stranger's horse. Had to be. But the stranger was still inside the house, still covering her escape. Eliza hesitated, her hand on the saddle, torn between self-preservation and something she couldn't quite name. The stranger burst through the door, moving fast. Blood stained his left sleeve, black in the starlight. "You're hurt," Eliza said stupidly. "I'll live. Mount up, now." She swung into the saddle, her muscles screaming from 2 days of riding and violence. The stranger cut the rope and grabbed the horse's mane, pulling himself up behind her in one smooth motion. His arms came around her to grab the reins, and then they were moving, the horse leaping forward into a gallop. Shouts behind them. More gunfire, muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Something whined past Eliza's ear. A bullet, she realized with detached horror. And then they were around the corner of the barn, using the building as cover. "Head down," the stranger said in her ear, his voice perfectly calm despite the chaos. "Stay low." He guided the horse with his knees, leaving his hands free to handle the rifle. They burst past the barn and into open ground, and Eliza saw what he'd done. 3 buildings were burning, a storage shed, part of the bunkhouse, a hay barn. The fires drew men like moths, and in the confusion, in the smoke and darkness and panic, 1 horse and 2 riders disappeared into the desert night. They rode hard for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The sound of pursuit faded behind them, swallowed by distance and darkness. Finally, when Eliza thought she might fall from the saddle out of pure exhaustion, the stranger slowed the horse to a walk. "There's an arroyo 2 miles north," he said. "We'll rest there, tend wounds, Then keep moving. Dalton will come after you with everything he has. We need distance." "Why did you do this?" Eliza's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Why did you help me?" "Tell you later. Stay conscious. I need you able to ride." "I don't even know your name." "Caleb Ross." A pause. "And you're Eliza Hart, property of Marcus Dalton according to papers filed in Tucson last week. Except now you're not his property anymore. Now you're a fugitive, same as me." "Fugitive from what?" "That," Caleb said, "is a much longer story. One I'll tell you when we're not being hunted." They rode in silence after that, the horse's steady gait eating up ground beneath the stars. Eliza's mind spun with questions, with fear, with an exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning. But underneath it all was something else, something bright and fierce and utterly unexpected. Hope. She'd escaped. Against impossible odds, against every piece of logic and reason, she'd escaped. And this stranger, Caleb Ross, had risked his life to make it possible. The arroyo appeared as a dark slash in the landscape, a dry riverbed cutting through the desert floor. Caleb guided the horse down the steep bank, and they stopped in the shadow of the overhang. He dismounted first, then helped Eliza down. Her legs buckled immediately, and he caught her, steadying her against the horse's flank. "Easy," he said. "You've been through hell. Take a minute." "Your arm," Eliza managed, seeing the blood more clearly now. "You're bleeding." "Flesh wound. I've had worse." He pulled a canteen from the saddle and handed it to her. "Drink. Not too much at once." The water was cold and clean, and the most wonderful thing Eliza had ever tasted. She forced herself to stop after a few swallows, handing it back. Caleb drank sparingly, his eyes never stopping their scan of the surrounding darkness. "How did you know?" Eliza asked. "About me. About what Dalton was doing." Caleb was silent for a long moment, tending to his horse, checking the saddle, making small adjustments with the ease of long practice. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "I didn't, at first. I saw a group of men traveling with a woman who was tied up, and that made me curious. Followed to see what the situation was. When you arrived at Dalton's ranch, I did some asking around in the nearest town. Found out about his wives, about the property transfers, about young women who arrived at his place and never left. So you decided to rescue a stranger." "I decided to stop a predator." His jaw tightened. "I've seen men like Dalton before. Hell, I've worked for men like Dalton before. They don't stop unless someone stops them." "You burned his buildings." "Distraction. Needed to divide his forces, make them think about protecting property instead of chasing us. By the time they get those fires under control and realize it was a diversion, we'll have a 12-hour head start." 12 hours isn't much." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not. Which is why we keep moving. I've got supplies cached 2 days north, food, ammunition, fresh horses. We reach those, our odds improve considerably." "And then what? We run forever?" Caleb looked at her properly for the first time since they'd stopped, really looked at her. His eyes were hard but not cruel, and Eliza saw a deep weariness there that matched her own. "There's a town," he said, "Redstone, about 80 miles north of here. It's small, remote, but it's got something most frontier towns don't. People who believe in protecting their own. We get you there, get you established. Dalton's legal papers won't mean much. Town's in a different territory, different jurisdiction. His reach doesn't extend that far." "You seem very certain of that." "I am." Something dark flickered across his face. "Because I'm hiding there too." Before Eliza could ask what he meant, Caleb pulled a cloth from his saddlebag and pressed it to the wound on his arm. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. Without thinking, Eliza moved to help, taking the cloth from him. "Let me," she said. "You saved my life. Least I can do is keep you from bleeding to death." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. He shrugged out of his jacket and rolled up his sleeve, revealing a deep graze across his bicep. The bullet had carved a furrow through muscle but missed the bone. Eliza cleaned it as best she could with water from the canteen, then tore a strip from her petticoat. She was wearing so many layers in this ridiculous dress, and wrapped it tight. "You've done this before," Caleb observed. "My mother was the closest thing to a doctor in our town. I helped her set bones, stitch wounds, deliver babies. She said every woman should know basic medicine because you never know when you'll need it. Smart woman. She was. Eliza's throat tightened. She died 6 months ago, pneumonia. After that, my stepfather. She couldn't finish the sentence. Sold you to the highest bidder, Caleb finished flatly. I'm sorry. You deserved better. Nobody gets what they deserve. They get what they survive. Caleb's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. You'll do fine in Redstone. The people there understand that philosophy. They rested for 2 hours, taking turns keeping watch. Eliza meant to stay awake during her watch, but exhaustion dragged her under like an undertow. She woke to Caleb's hand on her shoulder and the sky already lightening in the east. We need to move, he said. Can you ride? Every muscle in Eliza's body screamed in protest, but she nodded. Yes. They mounted up and headed north as the sun broke the horizon. The landscape changed gradually, less sand, more rock, patches of scrub grass growing more frequent. They rode in silence, both scanning constantly for signs of pursuit. Around midday, they stopped briefly to rest the horse and eat some dried meat from Caleb's supplies. Tell me about the town, Eliza said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own anxious thoughts. Redstone. What's it like? Caleb considered the question. Small, maybe 200 people. They've got a general store, a boarding house, a blacksmith. No law to speak of. Nearest marshal is 4 days' ride. That works in our favor. If there's no law, what stops men like Dalton from just taking what they want? The people. Redstone was founded by folks who didn't fit anywhere else. Former soldiers, freed slaves, Mexicans fleeing violence down south, women who left bad situations. They protect each other because nobody else will. It's not paradise, but it's honest. And they'll let me stay, just like that? You'll need to earn your keep. Work in the store, help the women who run the boarding house, something useful. But yeah, they'll let you stay. They let me stay, and I've got a lot more blood on my hands than you do. The casual way he said it made Eliza look at him more closely. Caleb Ross was probably 30, maybe a few years older, with the kind of weathered face that came from years in harsh conditions. The scar on his face was old, long healed, but there were others, a nick on his ear, faded marks on his knuckles. This was a man who'd lived through violence and carried the proof on his skin. What did you do? She asked. Before hiding in Redstone? Soldier for a while. Then a hired gun. Did things I'm not proud of for men who deserved worse than they got. He stared at the horizon. Eventually I drew a line, said there were jobs I wouldn't take, people I wouldn't hurt. My employers didn't appreciate that. So now they're hunting me, same as Dalton's hunting you. We make quite a pair. 2 fugitives on a dying horse heading toward a town that might not save us. Yeah, we're a real success story. Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, Eliza laughed. It came out harsh and half-broken, but it was real. Caleb looked at her with something like surprise, then shook his head. You're tougher than you look, Eliza Hart. I'm 19 years old, I've been sold like livestock, beaten, chased through the desert, and shot at. If I wasn't tough, I'd be dead already. Fair point. He stood, offering her his hand. Come on, we've got ground to cover. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, finally stopping when the horse was too tired to continue safely. Caleb found a place where huge boulders created a natural shelter, and they made a cold camp, no fire that might draw attention. They shared dried meat and hardtack, passing the canteen between them. Tomorrow we reach the supply cache, Caleb said. Fresh horses, better weapons, real food. After that, it's 2 days hard riding to Redstone. You think you can make it? Eliza thought about the last 3 days, about everything she'd endured and survived. She thought about Marcus Dalton back at his ranch, probably gathering men right now to hunt her down. She thought about the road ahead, the distance to safety, the 1,000 things that could still go wrong. Yes, she said simply, I can make it. Caleb studied her in the starlight, and something in his expression softened fractionally. I believe you. They settled into sleep, taking turns on watch again. When it was Eliza's turn, she sat with her back to the boulder and watched the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, Dalton was coming. Somewhere behind them, Jake Morrison and Phillips, and Monroe were tracking them, following whatever trail they'd left. The danger was far from over. But for the first time since her stepfather had sold her, Eliza felt something other than helpless terror. She felt angry, she felt determined, and she felt, in the quiet presence of Caleb Ross sleeping a few feet away, less utterly alone than she had in months. He'd come back for her. A stranger with no reason to care, no obligation to help, had risked his life to pull her out of hell. She didn't understand it yet, didn't understand him, but she was grateful in a way that went deeper than words. The night was cold and clear. A coyote called in the distance, and another answered. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the smell of sage and dust. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself and watched the horizon, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd actually make it out alive. When dawn broke, they were already moving, two riders on a gray horse racing toward a tomorrow that was uncertain, but at least belonged to them. Behind them, the past gave chase. Ahead, freedom waited like a promise that might yet be kept. And between the two, Eliza Hart discovered what she was truly made of. Not the frightened girl who'd stolen a dying horse, but someone harder, fiercer, someone who'd looked death in the face and chosen to fight back. Whatever came next, whatever price freedom demanded, she'd pay it. Because some things were worth any cost. And being her own person, answerable to no one, owned by nothing but her own choices. That was everything. They reached Caleb's cache by mid-morning, a carefully hidden spot where a rock overhang created a shallow cave. He'd buried supplies in waterproof canvas, ammunition, dried food, blankets, and most importantly, two fresh horses hobbled in a small canyon nearby. One was a sturdy buckskin mare, the other a rangy paint gelding with intelligent eyes. "These are yours?" Eliza asked, watching Caleb check the horses over with practiced hands. "Bought them 6 months ago, moved them here 2 months back. I've always believed in having an exit strategy." He tightened the buckskin cinch. "You'll take the mare. She's steady, won't spook easy. The gelding's faster, but he can be temperamental." They transferred supplies to the fresh horses, giving the gray a rest and some grain from the cache. Eliza changed out of the green dress. It was ruined anyway, torn and stained with blood and dirt. And into men's clothes Caleb had packed. Trousers, a rough cotton shirt, a leather vest. They were too big, but she rolled the cuffs and cinched the belt tight. For the first time in days, she could move without fabric tangling around her legs. "Better," Caleb said, handing her a hat. "Pull that low. From a distance, you'll pass for a young man. Might buy us some confusion if Dalton's men spot us." They ate quickly. Hardtack, jerky, and water. Then mounted the fresh horses and continued north. The buckskin mare moved smoothly beneath Eliza, and she felt her confidence growing. She'd been riding since she was 6 years old, but always side-saddle in dresses, always with the constraints of being a proper young lady. Now, in trousers and astride a good horse, she felt capable in a way she'd never experienced. "You ride well," Caleb observed after an hour. "Not just competent, actually good. My mother believed girls should know how to handle horses as well as boys. My stepfather thought it was unladylike. But by the time he married her, I already knew how. Your mother sounds like she was quite a woman." "She was." Eliza's throat tightened. She survived things that would have broken most people. Losing her first husband, raising me alone for 7 years, building a life from nothing. Then she married that bastard and... She stopped, swallowing hard. "I think she was just tired of fighting. So when the pneumonia came, part of her was almost relieved." Caleb was silent for a moment. "Sometimes survival takes everything you have, and when you've got nothing left, even living seems like too much effort." There was something in his voice that made Eliza look at him sharply. "You sound like you understand that." "I do." He didn't elaborate, his eyes fixed on the horizon. They rode through country that grew gradually less hostile, more grass, scattered trees, even a thin stream that the horses drank from gratefully. Caleb kept them moving at a steady pace, not running the horses, but not dawdling either. Every hour they rode was another 5 miles between them and pursuit. As the sun climbed toward its peak, Eliza saw dust on the southern horizon. She pointed it out to Caleb, her heart sinking. "I see it," he said grimly. "Been watching it for the last 10 minutes. That's riders. At least 6, maybe more. Dalton's men. Probably. They're moving fast, pushing their horses hard. He urged the paint into a faster trot, and Eliza matched his pace on the mare. We've got maybe 2 hours before they close the distance. There's rough country ahead, canyons, rock formations. We can lose them there if we're smart. And if we're not smart? Then we make a stand and hope we're better shots than they are. The rough country appeared exactly when Caleb had predicted, a maze of red rock canyons and narrow passages that twisted through the landscape like veins. He led them into the deepest canyon, the walls rising 30 feet on either side, blocking out half the sky. The horses' hooves echoed on stone. "This feels like a trap," Eliza said, eyeing the narrow walls. "It is. For them." Caleb pointed ahead where the canyon split into 3 different passages. "We take the eastern fork. It comes out 2 miles north into open country. The other 2 are dead ends. If they split up to search, we buy more time. If they don't split up, we're already gone." They took the eastern passage, moving as quickly as the uncertain footing allowed. Behind them, growing closer, Eliza could hear the sound of many horses, men's voices echoing off the canyon walls. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The passage narrowed, then opened suddenly into a wider area where a rock fall had partially blocked the way. Caleb dismounted quickly, studying the terrain with the eye of someone who'd spent years reading land for tactical advantage. "Take the horses through," he told Eliza. "There's enough room if you go single file. I'll be right behind you." "What are you doing?" "Making sure they take the wrong turns." He pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "Go! Now!" Eliza wanted to argue, but the sound of pursuit was too close. She led the buckskin through the narrow gap, the paint following, their bodies scraping against stone. On the other side, the passage continued northward, gradually widening. A gunshot cracked behind her, then another. Eliza's hands tightened on the reins. She heard men shouting, horses whinnying. Then Caleb appeared, running low, his rifle smoking. He swung onto the paint without breaking stride. "Go!" he shouted. "Fast as you can!" They ran the horses through the twisting passage, branches of rock reaching overhead like skeletal fingers. More gunshots behind them, but distant now, confused. Caleb's gambit had worked. He'd fired into the canyon, creating echoes that bounced off multiple walls, making it impossible to tell which passage the shots came from. The canyon opened abruptly onto open prairie, and they burst out into sunshine and space. Caleb immediately turned them east, away from the direct northern route. "They'll expect us to go straight for Redstone," he explained, pushing the paint into a ground-eating lope. "We'll circle around, come at it from the west. Adds a day to our journey, but it might throw them off." "Will we have enough supplies for an extra day?" "We'll have to." His jaw was set, his eyes hard. "Because the alternative is getting caught, and I'm not going back to the people hunting me. And you're sure as hell not going back to Marcus Dalton." They rode hard for another hour before Caleb finally slowed the pace. The horses were lathered with sweat, breathing hard. He led them to a small creek where they could drink and rest while he and Eliza kept watch. "How many men does Dalton have?" Caleb asked, scanning their back trail. "I saw maybe 20 at the ranch. But he's got money. He could hire more. And the men hunting me, if they've tracked me this far north, which they might have." Caleb's expression darkened. "We could be looking at 20, 30 men total, maybe more." "Who are they? The men hunting you?" Caleb was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on his rifle. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "I worked for a man named Garrett Sloan. Rich, powerful, owns half of New Mexico territory. I was his enforcer, the man he sent when someone needed convincing or removing. I was good at it. Too good." "What changed?" "He ordered me to kill a family, father, mother, 3 kids. They'd homesteaded on land Sloan wanted, refused to sell. He told me to make it look like Apaches did it." Caleb's hands clenched on the rifle. "I'd done bad things before. Killed men who probably didn't deserve it, hurt people who were just trying to survive. But I'd never killed children, never killed women. I told Sloan no." "What did he do?" "Sent 4 other men to do the job, then put a price on my head, $5,000 dead or alive. Said I'd stolen from him, killed one of his men, was a traitor. Within a week, every bounty hunter and hired gun west of the Mississippi knew my face." Eliza felt a chill run through her. $5,000 is enough to make men chase you across the country. It is. I've been running for 8 months. Killed 3 men who came for me, lost 2 others in the desert, barely escaped 4 more in Santa Fe. He looked at her directly. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not a hero. I'm not a good man who saved you out of the kindness of my heart. I'm a killer who finally found a line he wouldn't cross, and now I'm paying the price for every terrible thing I did before that. You still saved me, Eliza said quietly. Whatever you were before, whatever you didn't have to risk your life for a stranger. But you did. Maybe I was trying to balance the scales, save one person to make up for all the people I hurt. Does it? Balance the scales? No. The word was flat, final. It never does. But it's better than doing nothing. They remounted and continued eastward, then gradually curved back north as the sun began its descent. The land rolled in gentle swells, offering occasional cover, but nothing substantial. If Dalton's men spotted them out here, there'd be nowhere to hide, nowhere to run except forward. As darkness fell, Caleb found a depression in the land, barely enough to hide the horses, but better than being exposed on the open prairie. They made another cold camp, eating sparingly, speaking in whispers. 2 more days, Caleb said, staring at the stars. 2 days, and we're at Redstone. The town's people won't hand you over, even if Dalton shows up with papers and a dozen men. They've got their own sense of justice, and it doesn't include letting men like him own women like property. You said there's no law there. What if he just takes me by force? Then the town fights back. They've done it before. Caleb's expression was grim. 3 years ago, a man tried to take a Chinese woman from the boarding house, said she was his property, had papers showing she was indentured to him. The town told him to leave. He came back with 8 hired guns, lost 5 of them before he rode off. The woman's still in Redstone, running a laundry. People died defending a stranger? They died defending the principle that you don't own people. That matters in Redstone. It's why folks like me, like you, end up there. It's the last place west where your past doesn't define your future. Eliza pulled the blanket Caleb had given her tighter around her shoulders. I want to believe that. I want to believe there's a place where I can just be Eliza Hart, not property, not a fugitive, just myself. Believe it. I've seen it work. They took turns sleeping, 2 hours each, the other keeping watch. During Eliza's watch, around midnight, she saw lights in the distance, campfires, at least 3 of them. Too far away to pose immediate danger, but close enough to confirm they were still being hunted. When she woke Caleb for his turn, she pointed out the fires. He studied them in silence, counting, calculating. They're spread out, he murmured, searching in a grid pattern, smart. Dalton must have hired someone who actually knows tracking. Can we outrun them? We're going to try. He checked his rifle, the pistol at his hip. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. But Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay under the stars, listening to the night sounds, wind through grass, distant coyotes, the soft breathing of the horses. And she thought about the last 5 days, about how completely her life had transformed. 5 days ago, she'd been a 19-year-old girl living in her stepfather's house, hoping desperately for any future that wasn't Marcus Dalton. Now she was a fugitive in men's clothes, riding across the frontier with a killer who'd found his conscience, running toward a town that might be sanctuary, or might be just another place she'd have to flee from. But she wasn't property anymore. Wasn't tied up. Wasn't being sold. Wasn't waiting in a locked room for a monster to claim her. She was free, even if that freedom was temporary, even if it came with bullets chasing her across the desert. She'd choose this freedom with all its dangers over that captivity with all its false comforts. Dawn came gray and cold. They rode before the sun crested the horizon, pushing the horses hard. The prairie gave way to rolling hills covered in pinyon pine and juniper. Better cover, but also better ambush sites. Caleb kept them moving along the ridgelines where they could see trouble coming. Around noon they spotted riders ahead. Not behind them, ahead. 4 men on a rise, silhouetted against the sky. Caleb reined in sharply, pulling Eliza with him into a stand of trees. "Sloane's men," he said, his voice tight. "I recognize the horses. They must have heard about Dalton's chase, Figured I'd be moving north, set up to intercept. So we're trapped. Dalton behind us, Sloane's men ahead. Not trapped, just inconvenienced. Caleb studied the terrain, his mind visibly working through options. There's a canyon system to the west. Rough country, hard riding, but it cuts north and comes out near Redstone's eastern approach. If we can reach it before either group spots us. A gunshot cracked, and bark exploded from the tree next to Eliza's head. The 4 men on the ridge were moving, riding hard toward their position. "They've seen us," Caleb snarled. "Move!" They broke from cover at a full gallop, angling west toward the canyons Caleb had mentioned. More gunshots behind them, but at this range and speed, the chances of a hit were minimal. Still, Eliza felt her heart hammering, felt the buckskin mare stretching out beneath her, running for both their lives. The canyon mouth appeared like a wound in the earth, a jagged slash that dropped steeply downward. Caleb didn't hesitate, sending the paint plunging down the rocky slope. Eliza followed, the mare's hooves scrambling for purchase, small rocks cascading around them. A fall here would mean broken bones at best, death at worst. They hit the canyon floor and Caleb immediately turned them deeper into the maze. The walls rose around them, cutting off the sky, turning daylight into twilight. Behind them, Eliza could hear their pursuers reaching the canyon mouth, hear someone shouting orders. "They'll split up," Caleb said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Try to box us in. We need to keep moving. Stay ahead of them." The canyon twisted like a snake, branching and rejoining, creating a labyrinth of stone. Caleb navigated it with confidence that suggested he'd scouted this route before. They splashed through a shallow stream, climbed a steep section where the horses had to scramble, emerged into a wider area where sunlight filtered down from above, and found 5 men waiting for them. They were Dalton's men. Eliza recognized Monroe and Phillips among them. They'd somehow gotten ahead, probably knew this country better than she'd given them credit for. They had rifles leveled, and at this range they wouldn't miss. "End of the line," Monroe called out. "Get off the horses, both of you." Caleb's hand moved toward his rifle, but Phillips fired a warning shot that kicked up dust at the paint's feet. The horse danced nervously. "Don't," Phillips warned. "We've got you dead to rights. Mr. Dalton wants the girl back alive. He didn't say nothing about you being alive. So you can come easy, or you can die here. Your choice." Eliza saw Caleb's jaw tighten, saw him calculating odds that were clearly impossible. 5 men with rifles against 2 with limited ammunition and no cover. It was suicide. "Caleb," she said quietly, "don't. I'm not letting them take you back. You can't stop them, not here, not like this." She was surprised by how calm her voice was. "They'll kill you, and then they'll take me anyway. At least if you're alive, maybe there's another chance." "Listen to the girl," Monroe said. "She's smarter than you are. Now get down off those horses before I put a bullet through your knee and drag you down." Caleb dismounted slowly, his hands visible. Eliza did the same, her mind racing. There had to be something, some option they weren't seeing, some way out of this. But the canyon walls were too steep to climb, the men too spread out, their guns too steady. Monroe walked forward, rifle trained on Caleb. "You're the one who burned Mr. Dalton's property, killed 2 of his men. He wants you to pay for that." "I'll pay for it when hell freezes over," Caleb said flatly. "That can be arranged." Monroe raised his rifle, aiming at Caleb's chest. Eliza moved without thinking, putting herself between the rifle and Caleb. "No." Monroe hesitated, surprised. "Girl, get out of the way." "No." Eliza's voice was steady. "You want to shoot him? You shoot me first. Take me back to Dalton with a bullet hole in me. See how he reacts." "He'll just blame it on the escape. Say she got shot in the crossfire." Phillips had moved closer, his rifle also trained on them. "Move, girl. Last warning." "No." The word hung in the canyon air, simple and absolute. Eliza saw confusion flicker across Monroe's face, then anger. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by someone he considered property. "Fine," Monroe said, his voice turning cold. "We'll just wound her. Leg shot, maybe. Enough to remind her who's in charge. Not enough to kill her. Mr. Dalton won't mind if she's got a limp." He adjusted his aim, pointing the rifle at Eliza's leg instead of Caleb's chest. She didn't move, didn't flinch. If she was going to die, she'd die standing her ground, not cowering. The gunshot that rang out didn't come from Monroe's rifle. It came from above, from the canyon rim, and it took Monroe in the shoulder. He spun, crying out, his rifle falling. Two more shots followed in rapid succession. Phillips went down clutching his leg. Another man dropped his rifle and dove for cover. Eliza looked up and saw figures on the canyon rim. 5, 6, maybe more. They were shooting with precision, not trying to kill, but clearly capable of it. The remaining Dalton men scattered, looking for cover that didn't exist, and within 30 seconds they were either wounded or fleeing back the way they'd come. A rope dropped from the canyon rim, and a moment later a man was rappelling down. He hit the canyon floor and straightened, and Eliza saw he was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a sun-weathered face that was somehow both hard and kind. "Caleb Ross," the man said. "Heard you were headed our way. Thought you might appreciate some help." Caleb's face broke into something that might have been a smile. "Samuel, you have excellent timing. We've been tracking you for 2 days. Saw the pursuit, figured you could use some friends." Samuel's eyes moved to Eliza, taking in her appearance with one assessing glance. "This the girl they've been chasing?" Eliza Hart. "Eliza, this is Samuel Wright. I'm the man who runs Redstone," Samuel finished. "Or tries to, anyway. It's like herding cats, but someone's got to do it." He looked back up at the canyon rim and whistled sharply. "All clear. Bring down the horses." More ropes dropped, and with practiced efficiency, men and women descended into the canyon. They were a mixed group, men and women, white and black and brown, young and old. But they all moved with the same purposeful confidence, and they were all armed. "Dalton's men will regroup," one of the women said to Samuel. She was tall, with dark skin and eyes that missed nothing. "We've got maybe an hour before they come back with reinforcements. Then we move fast, get Ross and the girl mounted up, and we head for home." Samuel turned to Caleb and Eliza. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Caleb said. "Then let's go. Redstone's 3 hours hard ride north. By the time Dalton figures out where we went, we'll be behind walls with 50 armed citizens who won't take kindly to him, trying to take back what he thinks he owns." They mounted fresh horses. The Redstone people had brought extras, and moved out at speed. Samuel took the lead, guiding them through passages Eliza would never have found on her own, gradually climbing out of the canyon system and onto open ground. As they rode, Eliza found herself next to the tall woman who'd spoken earlier. "Why did you come for us? You don't even know me." The woman glanced at her, and something like sympathy flickered across her face. "I was property once. Slave in Louisiana before the war set me free. I know what it looks like when someone's running for their life. Figured if I could help, I should." "What's your name?" "Ruth. I run the boarding house in Redstone, along with my husband." She nodded toward a burly man riding point. "That's him, Thomas. We built that place to be a sanctuary for people who need one. You'll be safe there." "What if Dalton comes? What if he brings an army?" "Then we fight." Ruth said it simply, as if it were obvious. "We fought before, we'll fight again. That's what community means, protecting each other, even when it costs something." They rode hard through the afternoon, the landscape changing again as they climbed into higher country. The air grew cooler, pine trees more frequent. And then, as the sun touched the western horizon, Eliza saw it. A collection of buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys, light glowing in windows. Redstone. It wasn't much to look at, maybe 30 buildings total, clustered around a central square. But after days of desert and pursuit and violence, it looked like the most beautiful place Eliza had ever seen. Samuel led them straight to the boarding house, a 2-story structure that dominated one side of the square. People were already gathering, word having spread of their arrival. Eliza saw curiosity in their faces, but also something else: acceptance, recognition. These were people who understood what it meant to run, to need sanctuary. She dismounted on legs that barely held her, and Ruth was immediately there, steadying her. "Come on inside. You look like you could use food, a bath, and about 12 hours of sleep." "Dalton's men are coming," Eliza said. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. I don't want to bring trouble to your town." "Honey," Ruth said gently, "trouble was already here. We just decided a long time ago that some troubles are worth facing together. Now come on, let's get you settled." As Eliza followed Ruth toward the boarding house, she looked back at Caleb. He was talking with Samuel, his face serious, probably explaining the full scope of what was coming. But he must have felt her gaze because he looked up and their eyes met across the distance. He nodded once, a small gesture that somehow communicated everything. We made it. You're safe. Now we prepare for what comes next. And Eliza, standing in the square of a town she'd never seen before, surrounded by people she'd just met, felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. She felt like she'd come home. The boarding house smelled like fresh bread and wood smoke, and for the first time in what felt like years, Eliza felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. Ruth led her up a narrow staircase to a small room with a real bed, clean sheets, and a window that overlooked the town square. There were no bars on the window, no lock on the outside of the door. Bathwater's heating, Ruth said, setting down a bundle of clothes, a simple dress, undergarments, stockings. These belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Colorado. Should fit you well enough. You eat meat? Yes, anything. I'm not particular. Ruth's smile was warm. Good, because Thomas made stew and there's enough to feed an army. You rest, clean up, and come down when you're ready. No rush. After Ruth left, Eliza stood in the center of the room and felt her legs begin to shake. It was over. The running, the fear, the certainty that every moment might be her last. For now, at least, it was over. She'd made it to Redstone. She was safe. Then why couldn't she stop shaking? The bath helped. Ruth brought up a copper tub and filled it with hot water that smelled faintly of lavender. Eliza sank into it and let the heat seep into her aching muscles, washing away days of dust and blood and terror. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, washed her hair 3 times, and when she finally emerged, she felt almost human again. The dress Ruth had given her was blue cotton, simple but well made. It fit reasonably well, though Eliza was thinner than Ruth's daughter had been. She'd lost weight over the last week without even noticing. She braided her damp hair, looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, and barely recognized the face staring back. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes too large, and bruises still marked her face in shades of purple and yellow. But she was alive. She was free. Downstairs, the main room of the boarding house was full of people. Eliza counted at least 20, maybe more, all eating stew and cornbread and talking in low voices. The conversation stopped when she appeared, and she felt dozens of eyes on her. Heat rose in her cheeks. Don't mind them, Ruth said, appearing at her elbow with a bowl of stew. They're just curious. We don't get many new arrivals, and when we do, it's usually because someone's running from something. They understand. Everyone in this room is running from something. Eliza took the bowl and sat at a long table near the window. The stew was thick with meat and vegetables, the cornbread warm and buttered. She ate slowly at first, then faster as her body remembered how hungry it was. She was halfway through her second bowl when Caleb appeared, taking the seat across from her. He looked different somehow, cleaned up, his dark hair still damp, wearing a fresh shirt. The wound on his arm had been properly bandaged. But it was more than that. He looked less tense, as if coming to Redstone had lifted some weight from his shoulders. Samuel wants to talk to us, he said quietly, about what's coming, about Dalton. Eliza set down her spoon. When? Soon as you're finished eating, no rush. You need food more than we need another planning session tonight. What's there to plan? Dalton's coming with however many men he can hire. We either fight or we run again. We fight. Caleb's voice was flat, certain. Redstone doesn't run. And Samuel's got some ideas about how to make Dalton wish he'd never heard your name. Samuel Wright's office was attached to the general store. A cluttered space full of ledgers and supply lists and a detailed map of the territory pinned to one wall. He was there when Caleb and Eliza arrived, along with Ruth, Thomas, and 3 other people Eliza hadn't met yet. A lean Mexican man named Carlos, a young woman with red hair called Annie, and an older Chinese man introduced simply as Chen. Sit, Samuel said, gesturing to chairs. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Eliza, start from the beginning. How did you end up being chased across the desert by Marcus Dalton? Eliza told them everything, about her stepfather selling her, about the property transfer papers, about her attempted escape and recapture, about Dalton's ranch and his dead wives, and the dinner where he'd made his intentions clear. She told them about Caleb's rescue, about the chase through the canyons, about Monroe and Phillips in the canyon before Samuel's people had arrived. When she finished, the room was silent. Ruth's face was tight with anger. Thomas's hands were clenched into fists. Property transfer, Samuel said finally, disgust dripping from every word, not even trying to pretend it's a marriage. Just straight-up slavery with legal paperwork. It gets worse, Caleb added. Garrett Sloane's men are in the area too. At least 4, probably more. They've been tracking me for months, and they're not going to stop just because I'm in Redstone. If Dalton and Sloane's people decide to work together, then we're looking at 30, maybe 40 armed men coming at us from 2 directions, Samuel finished. He studied the map on the wall, his finger tracing possible approach routes. The good news is, Redstone's defensible. We're in a valley with limited access points. The bad news is, we're vastly outnumbered and we can't exactly call for help. Nearest marshal is 4 days away, and by the time he got here, it would all be over. So we fortify, Thomas said. Board up windows, set up firing positions, prepare for a siege. That's the last option, Samuel replied. A siege means civilians in danger, children scared, resources depleted. I'd rather find a way to end this before it comes to that. How? Eliza asked. Dalton thinks he owns me. He's not going to just give up and go home. No, Samuel agreed. But he might give up if the cost becomes too high. Men like Dalton, they think in terms of profit and loss. Right now, you represent an investment. He paid $400. He wants his property back. But if getting you back costs him 20 men, his ranch burned to the ground, and his reputation destroyed, that changes the calculation. You want to threaten him, Caleb said slowly. Make him understand that taking Eliza means losing everything. More than threaten, I want to make him an offer he can't refuse, or more accurately, an offer that's worse to refuse than to accept. Samuel turned to Chen. How much money can we raise if we needed to, say, buy out Dalton's claim? Chen's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Perhaps $800 if everyone contributes, but you said he paid $400. Why would he accept double when he could just take the girl by force? Because we're not just offering money, we're offering reputation. Samuel looked at Eliza. These property transfer papers, they're legal, but they're also morally repugnant. If word got out that Marcus Dalton was buying women like cattle, it would destroy his standing. No one would do business with him. Banks wouldn't extend credit. Other ranchers would shun him. Even men who don't care about morality care about appearances. You want to expose him, Eliza said, understanding dawning. Make it public. Force him to choose between his reputation and getting me back. Exactly. But we need proof. Copies of those papers. Testimony from people who know what he's done. Evidence that his other wives didn't just die of natural causes. We need to build a case so damning that every newspaper from here to San Francisco prints the story. I can help with that, Annie spoke up. She was younger than Eliza had first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with sharp eyes and ink stains on her fingers. I used to work for a newspaper in Denver before I needed to leave. I still have contacts. If we can get them the story, they'll print it. Getting the papers is the problem, Caleb said. They're at Dalton's ranch, probably in a safe. We'd have to break in, find them, and get out without being killed. That's assuming Dalton didn't bring them with him when he came after us. He didn't, Eliza said suddenly. At the dinner, he mentioned they were filed in Tucson. That means there are official copies at the territorial courthouse. Public records. Samuel's face split into a grin. Public records, which means anyone can request copies for a small fee. Carlos, how fast can you ride to Tucson and back? 3 days if I kill the horse, 5 if I don't. Take 4 days, ride hard but safe. Get copies of everything, the property transfer, the deed, any other documents with Dalton's name on them. We'll need proof. Samuel turned to Annie. Start writing. I want a story that lays out exactly what Marcus Dalton is, a man who buys women and buries them when he's done. Make it factual, make it damning, and make it impossible to ignore. What about Garrett Sloane's men? Ruth asked. They're hunting Caleb, not Eliza. They won't care about property papers or newspaper stories. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's my problem to solve. I won't let Redstone fight my battles. You're part of Redstone now, Samuel said firmly. That means your battles are our battles. But Ruth's right. Sloane's men are a different problem. They're professionals, and they're being paid well. We can't buy them off or shame them away. Then we kill them, Thomas said bluntly. If they come for Caleb, we make sure they don't leave. The words hung in the air, stark and brutal. Eliza looked around the room at these people who were so calmly discussing violence, death, warfare, and she realized this was what survival looked like on the frontier. Not noble or clean, but hard and practical and willing to do what was necessary. It won't come to that, Caleb said quietly. Sloane's men are smart. If they see the town's prepared to fight, they'll back off. They're being paid to bring me in, not to die trying. You sure about that? Samuel asked. No, Caleb admitted, but I'm hoping they value their lives more than $5,000. The meeting broke up shortly after, everyone heading to their assigned tasks. Carlos left immediately for Tucson, riding into the darkness with 2 fast horses and a sense of urgency. Annie disappeared to her room with paper and pen, starting on the story that might save Eliza's life. The others began organizing defenses, boarding up vulnerable windows, stockpiling ammunition, positioning men and women who could shoot at strategic points around the town. Eliza found herself back in her room at the boarding house, exhausted but unable to sleep. She stood at the window, looking out at Redstone's darkened square, and tried to process everything that had happened. A week ago, she'd been trapped. Now she was in a town full of strangers who were preparing to fight for her freedom. It felt surreal. A soft knock on the door. "It's me," Caleb's voice said. "Can I come in?" "Yes." He entered, closing the door behind him, but leaving it unlatched. Propriety, even here. Couldn't sleep either? Too much happening, too much to think about. Eliza turned from the window. "Caleb, all these people, they're putting their lives at risk for me. For us. What if someone dies? What if—" "Then it's their choice," Caleb interrupted gently. "No one's forcing them to fight. They're choosing to, because that's what community means. You heard Samuel. Everyone here is running from something. They protect you because they remember what it felt like to need protection. But I don't deserve—" "Stop." His voice was firm. "You survived being sold like property, chased through the desert, beaten, threatened, hunted. You kept going when most people would have given up. You deserve every bit of help these people are offering." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm scared. Not for me, for them. I couldn't live with myself if someone died because of me." Caleb crossed the room and took her hands, his grip warm and steady. People live and die for lots of reasons. If someone dies defending what they believe in, defending the idea that you can't own another person, that's an honorable death. It matters. It means something. Does it? Does any of this mean something, or are we just pretending we're not all one bad day away from dying in the dirt? "It means something," Caleb said, and there was absolute certainty in his voice. "I've spent 8 months running, Eliza. 8 months looking over my shoulder, sleeping with one eye open, trusting no one. And in all that time, I felt like I was slowly disappearing, becoming nothing but fear and survival instinct. But here, in Redstone, helping you, being part of something bigger than my own survival, that means something. That makes me more than just a man running from his past." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, and Eliza felt something shift between them. It wasn't romance. They were both too damaged, too exhausted for that. But it was connection, recognition. 2 people who'd found each other in the wasteland and refused to let go. "Get some sleep," Caleb said finally, releasing her hands. "Tomorrow, we start preparing in earnest. You're going to need your strength." He left, and Eliza finally lay down on the bed. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, she didn't dream of Dalton or the desert or violence. She dreamed of her mother, and in the dream, her mother was smiling and saying, "You did good, baby. You survived. Now you live." The next morning, Redstone transformed into a fortress. Men reinforced doors and shuttered windows. Women inventoried medical supplies and prepared bandages. Children were sent to hide valuables and help where they could. The town's single blacksmith worked overtime making crude but effective barricades from scrap metal. Eliza found herself assigned to help Ruth in the boarding house, which had been designated the central defensive position. They moved furniture to create firing positions, stockpiled food and water, and set up a makeshift infirmary in the dining room. "You know how to shoot?" Ruth asked, handing Eliza a rifle. My mother taught me. I'm not great, but I can hit what I'm aiming at if it's close enough. That'll do. Most of the fighting, if it comes to that, will be at close range anyway. Dalton's men won't want to sit back and trade shots. They'll try to rush us, overwhelm us with numbers. And if they succeed? Ruth's face was grim. Then we make them pay for every inch, but it won't come to that. Samuel's got a plan, and Samuel's plans usually work. 2 days passed. Redstone waited, tense and ready. Carlos hadn't returned yet from Tucson. There was no sign of Dalton or Sloane's men. The waiting was almost worse than action would have been, everyone jumping at shadows, seeing threats in every dust cloud on the horizon. On the third day, a rider approached from the south. Just one man, carrying a white flag. Samuel met him at the edge of town with Caleb, Thomas, and half a dozen armed citizens. The rider was one of Dalton's men. Not Monroe or Phillips, but someone Eliza recognized from the ranch. He stopped his horse 50 yards out and called, I got a message from Mr. Marcus Dalton. He wants to parley. Parley about what? Samuel called back. About returning his property. He's willing to negotiate. There's no property here, just free people. The girl, Eliza Hart. He's got legal papers saying she belongs to him. He's willing to pay for her return. $2,000 to the town, no questions asked, no repercussions. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then, tell Mr. Dalton that Eliza Hart is under the protection of Redstone. She's not for sale at any price. If he wants to press his claim, he can take it up with a judge. Mr. Dalton don't need no judge. He's got 30 men with him. Another 15 coming from the north, friends of his, says they're hunting some wanted killer. Together, that's 45 guns. You got what? Maybe 20 people who can shoot? He's giving you a chance to avoid bloodshed. Take the money. Give him the girl. Everyone walks away.
Or, Samuel said, his voice carrying across the distance, Mr. Dalton walks away now, forgets about Eliza Hart, and lives to enjoy his ranch and his money. If he brings 45 men against this town, I guarantee he'll lose at least half of them. We're dug in, we're ready, and we're fighting for something that matters. His men are fighting for a paycheck. When the bullets start flying, which side do you think will hold? The rider shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. I'm just delivering the message. Mr. Dalton says you got until sunset tomorrow to decide. After that, he comes in and takes what's his. You tell Mr. Dalton that sunset tomorrow, he's going to find copies of his property transfer papers in every newspaper from here to San Francisco. Tell him we've got testimony from people who worked at his ranch, who saw how his wives died. Tell him that by the time we're done, Marcus Dalton will be synonymous with slavery and murder, and no respectable person west of the Mississippi will do business with him. The rider paled slightly. You can't do that. Those are private papers. Public records filed in Tucson, perfectly legal to obtain and distribute. Now ride back to your boss and tell him what I said. He's got until sunset tomorrow to ride away and never come back. If he's still here after sunset, we go to war, and win or lose, his reputation dies with the first shot. The rider turned his horse and rode south, moving fast. Samuel watched him go, then turned to the assembled citizens. It's real now, he said quietly. 45 men coming against us. Maybe more if Dalton can hire additional help between now and tomorrow. Everyone needs to be ready. Check your weapons. Say goodbye to loved ones. Make peace with whatever you need to make peace with. Because come sunset tomorrow, everything changes. That evening, Carlos returned from Tucson. He was exhausted, his horse lathered, but he carried a leather satchel full of documents. Annie met him at the boarding house, snatching the papers and spreading them across the dining table. Perfect, she breathed, scanning the documents. Property transfer, deed, financial records. And look, this shows 3 previous transfers, 3 other women before Eliza. All marked as deceased within 2 years. That's our proof. Can you get this printed before tomorrow? Samuel asked. Already done. I sent the story by telegraph to my contact in Denver 2 days ago. Had to ride to the telegraph office in Millerville, 20 miles east, but it was worth it. They printed it in yesterday's edition. By now, copies are spreading across the territory. Annie's smile was fierce. Marcus Dalton's name is being dragged through the mud in every saloon and general store from here to the California border. Even if he kills all of us, he's destroyed. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. He can't win. Even if he takes me back by force, everyone will know what he is. More than that, Annie said, I included details about his other wives, where they're buried, how they died, testimony from the doctor who examined them. The territorial governor is being pressured to open an investigation. Dalton might be facing murder charges. Will it be enough? Caleb asked. To make him walk away? I don't know, Samuel admitted. Men like Dalton, sometimes their pride matters more than their survival. He might attack anyway, just to prove he can. Or he might realize the game is over and cut his losses. Sunset the next day approached with agonizing slowness. The town was silent, everyone at their positions, weapons ready. Eliza stood at the second-floor window of the boarding house, a rifle in her hands, and watched the southern horizon.
As the sun touched the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, riders appeared. Lots of riders. Eliza counted as they came into view, 30, 35, 40. They stopped just outside rifle range, a dark mass of men and horses silhouetted against the dying light. Here we go, Ruth murmured beside her. Whatever happens, Eliza, you stay down. Don't be a hero. These people are fighting for you, but you dying in the process defeats the purpose. Marcus Dalton rode forward from the group, flanked by 2 men. Even at this distance, Eliza recognized his bulk, his expensive clothes. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, Eliza Hart, I know you're in there. Come out, and this ends peacefully. Nobody has to die. Samuel appeared on the porch of the boarding house, his rifle cradled in his arms. She's not your property, Dalton, and everyone knows it now. Your name is ruined. Walk away. I've got 45 men who say different. Dalton's voice was tight with rage. I'm giving you one last chance. Send her out, or we burn this town to the ground. You try that, Samuel called back, and you'll be burying half your men. We're dug in and we're ready to fight. Is your pride worth that many lives? There was a long pause. Eliza could see Dalton conferring with the men beside him, see the tension in his posture. The other riders shifted restlessly, some clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Then, from the north, more riders appeared. A smaller group, maybe 10 men. They rode toward Dalton's position and stopped, and even from a distance, Eliza could see they weren't joining Dalton's forces. They were watching, waiting. That's Sloane's men, Caleb said quietly, appearing at Eliza's other side. They're not here for you. They're here for me. What do? We see if men value their lives more than their paychecks. Samuel seemed to have the same thought. He called out again, louder this time, addressing both groups. You men out there, you're being paid to fight, not to die. The man you're working for, Dalton, is finished. His reputation is destroyed. Newspapers across the territory are calling him a slaver and a murderer. You really want to die for a man who's already lost? Murmuring among Dalton's men. Eliza could see it even from here, the uncertainty, the doubt. Some were already turning their horses, preparing to leave. And you men from the north, Samuel continued, you're hunting a bounty. But that bounty means nothing if you're dead. You want to ride against a fortified town full of people defending their home? How many of you will survive? Is $5,000 worth more than your life? More murmuring. One of Sloane's men dismounted, speaking urgently to the others. They were arguing, clearly divided. Dalton was screaming now, trying to hold his forces together. I'm paying you. I own that girl. We're taking her back. But his men were already breaking away. 10, then 15, then 20. They turned their horses and rode off into the twilight, wanting no part of a battle that had already been lost before the first shot was fired. Dalton's voice rose to a shriek, cursing them, threatening them, but they kept riding. Within 5 minutes, Dalton was sitting on his horse with maybe a dozen men left. Sloane's group had split, half rode away, deciding the bounty wasn't worth it. But 5 remained, watching Caleb with cold, professional eyes. This isn't over, Dalton screamed at the town. You hear me? This isn't over. But it was, and everyone knew it. Without the numbers to overwhelm Redstone's defenses, without the support of men who now knew they were fighting for a losing cause, Dalton had nothing left but empty threats. He turned his horse and rode south, his remaining men following. They disappeared into the growing darkness, and a cheer went up from the town. People emerged from their positions, laughing and crying and embracing, the tension of the last days finally breaking. But Caleb was still watching the 5 men from the north. They hadn't left. They sat their horses in the twilight, waiting. Finally, one of them rode forward. He stopped at the edge of town and called out, "Caleb Ross, we've been hunting you for 8 months. $5,000 is good money. But you found yourself some good friends. I respect that." "So what now?" Caleb called back. "Now we ride away. But not because we're scared, because I'm tired of chasing ghosts across the territory. Tell Garrett Sloan if he wants you dead, he can do it himself." The man paused, then added, "You watch your back, Ross. Some men won't be as reasonable." They turned and rode north, disappearing into the darkness. And just like that, it was over. Both threats, both groups of armed men, gone. Retreating into the night, choosing life over violence, survival over pride. Samuel found Eliza on the porch, staring after Dalton's retreating form. "It's done," he said gently. "You're free. Legally, morally, completely free. Dalton's finished. He won't come after you again. He can't afford to." Eliza felt her knees give out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. All the fear, all the tension, all the accumulated horror of the last week came pouring out. Ruth appeared, wrapping strong arms around her, holding her while she cried. "It's all right," Ruth murmured. "Let it out. You're safe now. You're home." Home. The word settled into Eliza's heart like a seed finding soil. She'd never had a real home. Her mother's house had always been temporary. Her stepfather's ranch had been a prison. But here, in Redstone, surrounded by people who'd risked everything to protect her freedom, she felt something she'd never felt before. She felt like she belonged. The days that followed passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Dalton never returned. Word came through travelers that he'd left Arizona Territory entirely, fleeing to Mexico to escape the murder investigation that Annie's story had triggered. His ranch was seized by the territorial government, his assets frozen. The property transfer papers were officially nullified by a judge who'd read Annie's story and been horrified by the implications. Eliza Hart was declared a free woman, with all the rights and protections that entailed. Caleb stayed in Redstone. With Sloan's men backing off, at least for now, he could finally stop running, stop looking over his shoulder. He bought a small plot of land on the edge of town and started building a house. It was slow work, but he had help. The men of Redstone showed up regularly, turning what would have been months of labor into weeks. Eliza found work helping Ruth at the boarding house, learning the business of hospitality and community building. She discovered she had a gift for it, for making people feel welcome, for listening to their stories, for seeing the pain behind their eyes, and offering comfort without judgment. And somewhere in those weeks of work and healing, of building new lives from the wreckage of the old, something shifted between Eliza and Caleb. It started small. Him teaching her to shoot better, her patching his shirts when they tore, conversations that stretched late into the evening, sitting on the boarding house porch and watching the stars. One night, 3 months after they'd arrived in Redstone, Caleb appeared at the boarding house with something in his hands. It was dark, wrapped in cloth, and when he handed it to Eliza, she unwrapped it carefully. A knife. Not a big fighting knife, but a small, well-balanced blade with a handle carved from dark wood. The craftsmanship was exquisite. "Chen made it," Caleb said, "but I asked him to. I wanted you to have something to protect yourself with. Not because I think you need protecting, you've proven you can take care of yourself, but because everyone deserves to feel safe." Eliza turned the knife over in her hands, feeling its weight, its balance. "Thank you. There's something else." Caleb took a breath, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked nervous. "My house is almost finished. It's not much. 2 rooms, a good roof, solid walls, but it's mine, built with my own hands, on land I bought with honest work. And I was thinking, hoping, that maybe you'd want to see it sometime. Maybe even—" He stopped, struggling for words. "Maybe even live there?" Eliza finished softly. "Only if you want to. I'm not trying to own you or trap you. You're free, Eliza, completely free. You can stay at the boarding house. You can build your own place. You can leave Redstone if that's what you want. But if you're willing, if you think maybe you could see a future with a broken-down killer who's trying to be better than his past." Eliza kissed him. It was quick, impulsive. Not the romantic moment from storybooks, but it was real and honest, and it said everything words couldn't. When she pulled back, Caleb was staring at her with wide eyes. "I'd like to see your house," Eliza said. "And maybe we could see about a future. Not because I need rescuing or because I owe you anything, but because I've spent 19 years being what other people wanted me to be. And for the first time, I get to choose, and I choose you." "You sure?" "No," Eliza admitted. "I'm not sure about anything except that I'm alive, I'm free, and I want to build something good with whatever time I have left. That enough?" Caleb's smile was small but genuine. "That's more than enough." They were married a month later, in a ceremony that was more party than formal event. The whole town turned out. Samuel officiating, Ruth crying happy tears, Thomas providing music on a battered fiddle. There was no white dress, no church, no traditional vows. Just two people who'd found each other in the wasteland, promising to face whatever came next together. As the sun set on Redstone that evening, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Eliza stood on the porch of the house she now shared with Caleb and looked out at her new home. Children played in the square, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Smoke rose from chimneys as families prepared dinner. Somewhere, someone was playing a harmonica, the notes sweet and melancholy. Caleb emerged from inside, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He gave her one and stood beside her, his shoulder touching hers. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Running, fighting, all of it." "Never," Eliza said immediately. "Even the worst parts, being chased, being scared, not knowing if I'd survive another day. It was all worth it to get here." "Here meaning Redstone? Or here meaning this porch? With me?" "Both." She turned to look at him, this scarred, damaged man who'd risked everything for a stranger and somehow ended up becoming her everything. "I was someone's property, Caleb. I was going to die in Marcus Dalton's house, just another name on a list of women who didn't matter. But I fought back, I survived, and I found this place, these people, you. So no, I don't regret any of it." "Your stepfather sold you for $400, Caleb said. "Dalton thought he could own you. Sloane's men thought they could collect their bounty. They were all wrong. You know why?" "Why?" "Because you can't own fire. You can't trap it, or contain it, or make it behave. You can only respect it, or get burned trying to control it." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "You're fire, Eliza. Always have been. I'm just lucky enough to be the one standing close enough to feel the warmth." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were the tears that came when you finally found the words you'd been searching for your whole life. Words that said you mattered, you were seen, you were valued, not for what you could provide, but for who you were. "I love you," she said. The first time she'd said it, the first time she'd meant it. "Not because you saved me, though you did, not because I need you, though maybe I do, but because you looked at me and saw a person, not property. You treated me like I had value when everyone else saw me as something to be bought and sold. That's worth everything." "I love you too," Caleb replied, "and I promise you this, no one will ever own you again. No one will ever treat you as less than you are. And if they try, they'll have to go through me first." They stood there as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who'd been broken and discarded by the world, who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Behind them stood a house they'd built together. Around them lived a community that had fought for their right to exist freely. And ahead of them stretched years of possibility, of choices made together, of a future that belonged to them and no one else. Eliza Hart had been told she was someone's first, the first woman her stepfather sold, the first property Marcus Dalton purchased with his new papers. But she'd become someone's last instead, the last woman who'd ever be owned, the last person Caleb Ross would ever have to rescue, the last of something old and terrible, and the first of something new and precious. She was free, completely, wholly, permanently free. And in that freedom, she'd found something more valuable than safety or security or survival. She'd found home. The stars came out one by one, cold and brilliant against the darkening sky. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the smell of sage and pine and the promise of tomorrow. And in Redstone, Arizona territory, two people who'd once been fugitives stood together and watched the night descend, knowing that whatever darkness came, they'd face it together. Some stories end in tragedy, some end in triumph. This one ended in truth, the simple, powerful truth that freedom is worth fighting for, that community is worth building, and that love, real love, is the choice to stand beside someone not because you have to, but because you want to. Eliza had been someone's first, but she'd chosen to be Caleb's last. And in that choice, in that promise, she'd found everything she'd been running toward without even knowing it. She'd found herself.